Welcome to the Hell Show, marvelous writers. So, the most crucial artifact in Clive Barker's Hellraiser is the LeMarchand's box. It's a priceless and damned object responsible for most of the terror the Cenobites have caused over the years. But what might catch many by surprise are the dark origins of this box, even more so of its deranged creator. Philip LeMarchand, the French architect who created the LeMarchand's boxes, including the Lament configuration, went to terrible lengths to construct them. While he was certainly no Cenobite, he was a demon in his own right. In his heyday, LeMarchand was the genius inventor, but he's also considered the most underappreciated mass murderer in history. His notoriety was born of his deviant urges and need for human fat, a necessary ingredient of his precious boxes. And for this, he killed without conscience or count, not even sparing those close to him. LeMarchand's personal journal is filled with the most gut-churning imagery, and his interaction with the Cenobites was as cordial as a human Ceno meat can get. No blood or hooks at all. Which brings us to the question, was he the only human ever to have the Cenobites' favor? In this video, we'll explore the diabolical creator of the Lament configuration and also his starkly different stint in the Hellraiser movie. But before we get into it, we have a small request. If you like our content, please do us a solid by subscribing. It's a small click for you, but it means a lot to us. Thank you.
Is it done?
Done.
Who is Philip LeMarchand? Philip LeMarchand is the architect of the Lament configuration and about 269 other puzzle boxes that break open a schism between the human world and the hellish dimension where the Cenobites conduct their business. And to achieve this feat, LeMarchand literally went to the doors of hell and back. For all the atrocities he had piled up in his drive to create the boxes, his name became synonymous with dread and fear, making him France's most infamous personality, even worse than Albert Speer, who is considered Hitler's architect. LeMarchand had once even applied to design the White House, believe it or not, but his application was duly rejected, given the terrible reputation. There are two origin stories for the Architect of the Damned, the super detailed tale laid out in the comics, and then there's the better-known story from the film Hellraiser Bloodline. While the movie version of Philip LeMarchand is the one most fans would be familiar with, the comic history is where he really branches out as an evil genius. In Clive Barker's Book of the Damned 3, A Hellraiser Companion, we uncover Philip LeMarchand's journal, a detailed personal account of his desperation to make the box, which to him was the epitome of geometry and order. Born in 1717, Philip LeMarchand was an architect by trade. Becoming jaded with his work, he sought stimulation in other ways. This is when he began the pursuit to create the puzzle boxes that would later come to be called the LeMarchand's boxes. His quest led him to make many acquaintances with men of occults and all things macabre. Eventually, he came face to face with a Cenobite, but unlike most humans who glimpse the entrance to hell, LeMarchand escaped without a scratch. How is that even possible, one might wonder? The agents of hell must exact a price once summoned. However, Baron, the Cenobite who visited LeMarchand, saw value in him. He not only spared LeMarchand, but also gave him one of the most vital materials he was lacking to create the box. The quest for the puzzle box. Leonardo da Vinci once said, "One ought to desire the impossible." Inspired yet perplexed by this concept, Philip LeMarchand rolled along on his mission to create the puzzle box, aided by his assistant, the 16-year-old apprentice Stephen, the son of a clockmaker. Steel, the metal alloy LeMarchand tried to use as a base for the box, was not cutting it for him. But with nothing else at his disposal, he kept working with steel. With the help of an acquaintance, LeMarchand came upon the works of Rice Kunst, who had been crafting geometrical boxes just like he hoped to. They were made with a peculiar material, like a dark polished stone that was smooth of touch but radiated heat. This material was totally unheard of in the science scene. Kunst's boxes even came with bizarre names that LeMarchand was entirely unfamiliar with. Like one of them was called Cenobites' Welcome and Spiral of Desperation. While LeMarchand was a tad confused by these discoveries, he also felt a tinge of excitement when he learned that Kunst's work were modeled after the boxes created by Albertus Magnus in the 13th century. He was well aware that Albertus Magnus was the pinnacle when it came to the boxes. With this lead in hand, LeMarchand went on to explore an ever-darkening rabbit rabbit hole to fulfill his obsession with the boxes. He read everything he needed to, from Kunst's insights on Puzzle Box and his philosophy on violence and murder being an aphrodisiac, to a personal journey to the cold-stoned hell labyrinth of a man by the name of Livingston Merrick. Perhaps the most jaw-dropping horrific moment in his research was when LeMarchand got his hands on a book called The Alternative Anatomy of the Human Body by a man named Bodecker. The book was filled with gruesome chopping and piecing together of human parts with hooks and buttons, and reshaping the internal human anatomy to work with these gross alterations. For instance, he describes redesigning the human hand with everything from adding extra digits to something called making the predatory hand. This basically meant inserting a jaw into the palm of the hands and reorganizing the digestive system to be able to digest whatever the hand is eating. Bodecker had found it easier to use the jaws of rats and weasels than human jaws, and illustrated this experiment and a whole lot more over the pages. At this point, any regular guy would just hit the brakes and recalibrate a little. One would be like, what am I getting myself into? But old Philip did not. He was instead fascinated by the treatise. It's said that the masochistic Cenobite, Sazerbil, had helped Bodecker either in his experimentation or writing of this treatise, which is strewn with the grimmest images, and they can be seen in the LeMarchand's journal. During this time, LeMarchand also began to learn more about the supernatural order of the Cenobites, and it was just as well, because he would soon meet with one. Meeting a Cenobite. When LeMarchand returned to France, he bought two critical things from a dealer called Antoine de Moray. First, some pages from a volume that contained the legends of Gilles de Rais, a man who was executed by the law for burning over 100 children to death. Contrary to popular belief, Gilles was not trying to evoke devils with his ritualistic sacrifice. He was looking for Cenobites. These pages describe hell in terrifying detail, with many of its creatures and the Cenobites. Even so, it was LeMarchand's second purchase from Moray that would completely shatter his moral fabric. In a twist of fate, Moray brought to him a box he had in his possession. The box was created by Albertus Magnus, the 13th century guy, the very first tether in his string of research about the boxes. Moray put a high price on the items, which LeMarchand happily paid. LeMarchand spent the night playing with the puzzle box he had bought, turning the tiny brass plates on its surface until he hit it just right, and the box began to shuffle and shift. Tiny flaps with the number 9 embellished over them opened up, and underneath them were two little brass birds. The birds joined together, and delicately beautiful music came out of the box. He also heard a chiming of distant bells, as though someone had been alerted elsewhere. And then an overpowering scent of vanilla floated through. LeMarchand's cabin's walls opened into a dark, stony place, which LeMarchand immediately recognized from everything he had read to be the labyrinth. Out came Baron, a grotesque, mutilated Cenobite with bloodless skin, almost a shade of blue, pulled tightly over his skull, giving him a ghastly, permanent grin and popping eyes. Though taken aback at Baron's appearance, LeMarchand told him that he was looking for the Cenobites. He explained how hard and long he had been trying to create a puzzle box like Albertus Magnus's, but steel proved to be a frustrating metal in his experimentation. Baron was unusually intrigued by LeMarchand, especially his fascination with order and geometry. Baron felt he would serve Leviathan, the god of the labyrinth, well, and let him off the hook. To LeMarchand's horror, he found himself watching Baron brutally take control of another man and carry him off to suffer in LeMarchand's stead. That is the last thing LeMarchand remembered when he woke up. He didn't have any memory of how he even got to bed. Although too far gone, to the point of no return, LeMarchand became rife with the fear of what was to come. As he would go on to finally create his own box, though, his nature would become so infected with evil that he would quickly forget his fears. Creation of the box. LeMarchand revisited Kunst's illustrations of the box and began to fashion his own. His behavior changed drastically as he discovered his latent sadism. One night in particular, LeMarchand brutally beat up a prostitute, Anna, at his usual hang, Madame Turtledove's. Later on, he got drunk and gave the same treatment to his loyal apprentice Stephen, who was shocked to find what his caring teacher had become. After LeMarchand had his way with him, he killed him and harvested his fat. But unfortunately, he had hardly done his worst. Poor Anna would meet with a fate even more dreadful than Stephen's. But that would come later. Using human fat with the material, that soft black stuff that he had read about in Kunst's works, LeMarchand began to make his puzzle box. He was able to quickly fashion his intricate box design into being. How did he get his hands on the material? It was provided to him by the Cenobites, in all likelihood. LeMarchand needed quite a few people's body fat to make just one box, so he murdered for his need. His design became more sophisticated as he went along, and then finally he created his first box, the Lament configuration. His boxes became a rage in Europe. Everyone from the upper echelon of society, especially the libertines, wanted one. They came to be called the LeMarchand's boxes. But the city had a rising concern. The disappearances of noted citizens became an epidemic, especially those who had bought the LeMarchand's boxes. Now, you remember poor Anna? LeMarchand actually found a way to get to her again. After cornering her into the room, he solved one of his puzzle boxes, invoking the Cenobites. He gave Anna to them, but they granted him the pleasure he sought, that of torturing Anna himself. He took her apart, bone by bone, oblivious to her agony. Later, he would go on to create a puzzle box inspired by the systematic dismantling of her bones that had brought him so much pleasure. Well, viewers, you've got to know this. Reading through Philip LeMarchand's grim journal is not for the faint-hearted. But here is where the story turns, giving a whisper of hope for those who've come to rightfully despise this monster. With the boxes doing luxuriously well at the auctions, Philip LeMarchand had become quite famous and rich. He bought the entire volume whose pages Antoine de Marais had given him earlier. In it, he discovered how to destroy a Cenobite. But following this acquisition, in the backdrop of the murder investigations gaining steam, LeMarchand was suddenly abandoned by the Cenobites to whom he had given so much. LeMarchand could no longer use the puzzle's magic. It simply stopped working for him. It was as though Leviathan had tossed his favor out the window and left him exposed, to get caught and seized by the police. The Cenobites have no attachment with humans, and the architect of the damned learned this the hard way. To end his journal, LeMarchand promised to redeem himself for his sins. From this point onwards, he always seemed to be on the run. The authorities had begun to close in on him. He had to abandon his home and flee from Europe in haste. Most records about his deeds were wiped out or destroyed at the beginning of the Second World War. His name was curiously struck out of any remaining records, just as LeMarchand had hoped and had somehow managed to do. He kept a low profile, selling his puzzle boxes at lower prices, and returned to architecture to get by, though his buildings looked like larger versions of the puzzle boxes. As a withering man of 94, LeMarchand checked into the Hotel Darnay. This was the last anyone saw of him. When the management entered his room, there was no one there, only one of his boxes on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. Well, it's only fair that his life ends with the box that had indeed become his whole life. LeMarchand in the movie. LeMarchand is seen in a much lighter shade than his mass-murdering self in the movie Hellraiser Bloodline. In the film, he is a famed toy maker who is contracted by a sadist aristocrat, Duc de Lille, to make a puzzle box. He creates the Lament configuration, unaware of Lille's intentions. Lille and his right-hand man Jacques sacrifice a young girl and use dark magic with the box to rouse a hell demon. Leviathan's daughter Angelique comes through and promptly wears the sacrificed girl's body. Jacques and her kill Lille and gain control of the house. Meanwhile, LeMarchand is working on making a box that would be the reverse of the Lament configuration, one that would demolish any Cenobites around. Angelique kills him for this, but his progeny survives and would live on to avenge LeMarchand at another juncture way in the future. Marvelous verdict. While Philip LeMarchand's role in the film is fleeting and without a speck of villainy, his comic counterpart is a monster to reckon with. This latter version of Philip LeMarchand did not start his journey affixed with great evil, but got there because of his puzzle box mania. He soaked himself into his pursuit without realizing the demons he was courting, and before he knew it, the lines between right and wrong began to blur. He even made a self-portrait of his unpalatable face. It was not an oil on canvas, but fat and paint on canvas, mind you. Philip's rampage of harvesting human fat to create the box that opens the portal to a dimension of inescapable horrors makes one feel that by the end of it, he did not receive the entire due. Or maybe he did. After all, the Cenobites spare no one, and he most likely crossed over to Labyrinth in the end. If you're learning about Philip LeMarchand's life for the first time, I'm sure you must be like, how deep can the Hellraiser gore bag go? And the answer for the fans is always Not deep enough. Okay, we'll be signing out now. Let us know your impression of our horrific Inventor in Focus in the comments below. If you like this video, please smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Bye-bye then.